When the Son of Man cometh, shall he find faith on the earth?
Lord, I believe, help thou mine unbelief.
May our testimonies be as deep and as strong as that of Jacob, who, when confronted by one who sought to destroy his faith, declared, "I could not be shaken."
Hello, my friends, and welcome back to Unshaken. I'm Jared Halverson, and I'm grateful as always for the privilege of joining you for Scripture study. I know this is sacred time, and I want to treat it that way. I've got my shoes off as normal so that we can be walking on holy ground. My sleeves rolled up so we can get to work. This is actually our last week of work in Corinth, before we start heading north and east back to Asia Minor so we can study with the Galatians next week, which is a beautiful letter. We're starting to get into the smaller, shorter letters. And so no more will we have more than 1 week in a single place, except when we get to Hebrews. We'll spend a little extra time there. But we have some amazing epistles ahead with challenges across the Mediterranean that are as relevant today as they ever were in the ancient world. And I hope that you feel that today as we finish off 2 Corinthians. This is our fifth week among the Corinthian saints, and that feels like a long time, but Paul had a year and a half there, okay? And so imagine all that he's learned, all that he's seen, all that he's heard in his absence, and all of the issues that he's trying to resolve from a distance as he writes these letters. The way we ended last week was with godly sorrow, as he reflected on the reaction the Corinthian saints had to his Christ to repentance in 1 Corinthians and likely in some other letters as well. And what a blessing that they felt that indignation and that zeal and that revenge and that sorrow that allowed them to change, to produce within them a broken heart and a contrite spirit, so that repentance on their part would be real, and that forgiveness would come so quickly from the Father of mercies and the Lord of love. From there, we are going to move forward into a different topic as we turn to chapter 8. We'll finish off 2 Corinthians, like I said, and so 8 through 13 is this week's material. And it starts with something that is very down to earth, very practical, very pragmatic, because saints in Jerusalem are suffering. There's been a famine there. The saints are poor and struggling and need all the help that they can get. We hear stories like this every time we turn on the news. And whether it's fires in Hawaii, whether it's a hurricane in the Caribbean, whether it is immigration or displacement or refugees, there are poor people struggling and suffering the world over. And whether their poverty and struggles are caused by wars and rumors of wars, whether they are by natural disaster or famine or pestilence or plague, all of the things that constitute signs of the times in our day, I hope that they pull not only on our heartstrings, but on our purse strings as well, because so often it takes money to be able to meet their needs. Actually, those two strings need to be intertwined. It needs to be our purses and our hearts in such a way that we have a righteous desire to help them. If we can feel the kind of compassion we talked about last week, the kind of empathy, where we are fellow sufferers with them and understand what they're going through, then that heart will then pull the purse right along with it. And we'll have a desire to dig deep and be generous, knowing that we would need just as much generosity from others if we were in those circumstances. That's where the Corinthian saints find themselves now, not in such difficulty themselves, but hearing from Paul and from Titus and these other missionaries, the struggles that the saints are dealing with there back in Jerusalem. And Paul and his fellow companions are trying to gather funds. Think about everything we do with fast offerings. Think about what we do with humanitarian aid. When I was a little boy, I was probably 10 years old. Yeah, it was 1985. And a newly called apostle, very young, named M. Russell Ballard, was tasked with taking whatever money we could amass to Ethiopia to help with a famine that was taking place there. And this was a game changer for the church because there were not many church members in Ethiopia at the time. But that didn't matter. There were children of God there that were suffering. And as the Lord's kingdom upon the earth, it was up to us to contribute all that we could. And so President Benson at the time called for a worldwide, church-wide day of fasting and fast offerings. And whatever money was raised that day, Elder Ballard would take to Ethiopia to distribute and help the people that were suffering. And I remember as a 10-year-old boy going to, it was a midweek fast, not a fast Sunday, and a kind of special occasion, all hands on deck. And I remember as a 10-year-old going to elementary school and sitting there in the cafeteria with no food in front of me. And my friends were like, Jared, here, have my sandwich. I'm like, no, I'm good. We'll have my fruit snacks. No, I'm not hungry, which was a lie. But they're like, why aren't you eating? And I didn't know what to say as a 10-year-old, so I just stammered out something about Ethiopia and trying to help the people that were starving there. And I don't know if that made sense to my friends, but I felt like I was part of something bigger than myself. And what an amazing thing that in that one day of fasting, the church raised $6 million. It's a lot of money. In one day, that didn't really cost us anything except a day of feeling hungry ourselves, feeling for a day what the Ethiopians were feeling day after day after day. And with that empathy in place, with that shared suffering having been experienced, then of course the wallets and purses open. And hopefully we can be even more generous than whatever we would have spent on ourselves that day in terms of food. That, in my mind, marks the beginning of what has since become an ever-increasing and expanding global humanitarian aid effort. It took us a long time to be able to meet our own needs, to get out of debt, first of all, and then to be able to provide for the saints. But to begin getting to a point where we can now look beyond our own borders spiritually. Actually, not spiritually, ecclesiastically, looking beyond our own church borders. To see our spiritual brothers and sisters of whatever faith or no faith at all, fellow children of God that are in need. And Paul is sensing that deeply on behalf of the saints in Jerusalem. And so he's writing to the saints in Corinth. Remember, Corinth is location, location, location. A trade route, a place of prosperity. If you can give of your abundance to meet the needs of those that are in lack and want, then what a blessing you will be to them, as they, spiritually, have been a blessing to you. And so with that in mind, turn to 2 Corinthians chapter 8, and let's see how this mission of mercy unfolds. Real consecration to the poor. Verse 1 and 2, moreover, brethren, we do you to wit, which means we want you to know. We want you to know of the grace of God bestowed on the churches of Macedonia. And Macedonia is further north in Greece. Corinth is there on the southern end in a region called Achaia. But Paul wants them to know about what's been happening among the churches further north. And he describes it this way, how that in a great trial of affliction, and the Corinthian saints know all about that too. So much of what we studied last week at the beginning of 2 Corinthians had to do with adversity and affliction. But you're not alone in that. The saints further north have been tried by great affliction as well. But notice what came as a result. In a great trial of affliction, the abundance of their joy and their deep poverty abounded unto the riches of their liberality. Now you take all those phrases and wonder, how on earth do they all belong in the same sentence? How do you combine great trials of affliction with an abundance of joy? And how on earth do you turn deep poverty into the riches of liberality? Think about that. Yes, this is opposition in all things. Lehi would perk up about that. But to think about what the saints in Macedonia had gone through themselves and what it made of them. Again, this is compassion, suffering with. This is empathy, suffering in. And that since they themselves had been through trials of affliction, since they knew personally what it felt like to endure deep poverty, no wonder as soon as they were able, and maybe even before they were fully able, they turned those difficulties into motivation to bless others going through similar trials. There's something powerful about consecrating our affliction so that it motivates us to then consecrate our time, our talents, our means, anything we can offer to people who are suffering in ways that we once were, and maybe to a degree still are. Deep poverty. Have we ever felt that? Have we ever been to a place? Missions are amazing along these lines, especially if you serve in a third world country, a developing nation, to see real poverty and to come to know and love the people that are enduring it, and just wanting to bless them in any way that you can. To take the shirt off your back if you could, to give them all that you are able. And these Macedonian saints, having experienced deep poverty, it's now abounding to the riches of their liberality. So liberal that they want to give all that they can to the suffering saints there in Jerusalem. And Paul is hoping that by dropping these hints about the saints in Macedonia, the saints in Corinth will have a desire to follow suit. A little friendly competition, perhaps. I always saw this around Thanksgiving time, where the University of Utah and BYU would have competitions as far as how much food can you donate to the Utah Food Bank. That's my kind of rivalry. Okay, it's going to bless as we provoke one another to additional generosity. That's what Paul is getting at here. In verse 3 and 4, he says, "For to their power I bear record. Yea, and beyond their power, they were willing of themselves, praying us with much entreaty that we would receive the gift and take upon us the fellowship of the ministering to the saints." Now, in a later letter, Paul will talk about the fellowship of Christ's sufferings. And fellowship is something he's trying to establish within every branch and between every branch of the church. That we are fellow citizens with the saints, he'll say in a later letter. That we are one with one another. And if we're going to overcome the divisions that are tearing the Corinthian church apart, can we become one heart, one mind, dwelling in righteousness, no poor among us or any other branch of the church? We're trying to establish Zion here, and that's how the Lord defines it. And so here, it's not just the fellowship of suffering. We've all been in that as well. And if that plants within us a desire to be more generous to others, to turn our suffering into someone else's joy and our poverty into someone else's provisions, then the fellowship of suffering can now become a fellowship of ministering to one another. We are all in this thing together. But the way Paul says it in that verse is so powerful. Again, trying to provoke the Corinthian saints into matching the generosity of the Macedonians. Notice how he put it. It was to their power, but also beyond their power. They were generous to the point that it began to hurt. That's how C.S. Lewis described real charity. If it doesn't affect us at all, then, well, it wasn't really a sacrifice. And yet, if there are certain things we cannot do for ourselves because we've been overly generous to others, and overly, keep that in quotes. Remember, King Benjamin warned about this. Once you truly see what a beggar you are before God and how generous, I mean, talk about the riches of his liberality, that he has poured out blessings upon us more than we deserve. Once we realize how generous God has been with us, we tend to be more than generous with others, to the point that King Benjamin had to rein them in a bit. Don't run faster than you have strength, was the advice he gave to people in the context of charity, of generosity. Imagine that. Yeah, if the bishop had to say, you know what, I'm refunding some of your fast offerings because I don't want you to get in debt as you're trying to help other people. Yeah, that's a desire. That's going above and beyond the call of duty. And these Corinthian saints are crossing that line in beautifully generous ways. To their power, beyond their power. When he said they were willing of themselves, there was no arm twisting there in Macedonia. As soon as they heard what the Jerusalem saints were suffering, they reached into their pockets and they reached deep. They checked the couch cushions. They limited their own expenditures on self. Where can I save so that I can give more? And it was all it all came from a very willing place within them, willing of themselves. When it says they prayed us with much entreaty that we would receive the gift, again, that suggests the level of their generosity. So surprising to the missionaries that the missionaries were like, no, you can't give that much. You need to save more for yourselves. And they're like, no, I insist. And the missionaries are like, no, we insist. And the Macedonian saints, no, we insist. I mean, have you ever been in that, the back and forth of insisting and finally the person who surrenders? Okay, you win. You can be the one that foots the bill. You can be the one that is more generous here. And these Macedonian saints insisted that the missionaries receive the gift. They wanted to be part of the fellowship of the ministry. We can't join with you on the journey to Jerusalem, but please take our money as a way of taking our heart with you, because our hearts go out to those who are suffering there. The next time you're paying your tithing and making donations, I hope that we can keep the news on as we're writing out our check, that we can understand what is going on in a world full of fellow sufferers, and that we might join the Lord in a fellowship of ministry to meet their needs. In verse 5 through 7, Paul says, this they did, those wonderful Macedonian saints, not as we hoped. And a better way to say that is even more than we had hoped. I mean, they exceeded our expectations, our wildest imaginations. No wonder the insistence on their part. No wonder us going, no, you don't need to give that much. This is beyond your power. They didn't care, okay? More than we had hoped. But first gave their own selves to the Lord and unto us by the will of God. Now think about the order there. This goes back to what I said about heartstrings and purse strings. And the first thing they offered was their heart. They first gave their own selves to the Lord. How's that for personal consecration? They gave themselves unto us, the apostles are saying. It was all the will of God that they would do this. But these are specific actions as an outgrowth of their covenant commitment to God. In fact, to the two great commandments. I love God. There's them giving themselves to the Lord. And I love my neighbor. That's giving themselves to the apostles and to the people to whom the apostles will give their all. Okay? You remember the verse in Jacob when he says, before you seek for riches, seek for the kingdom of God. And after you have obtained a hope in Christ, ye shall obtain riches if ye seek them. For ye will seek them with the intent to do good. And notice it was ye shall, not thou shalt. It was not a commandment, it was a natural result. Once you have obtained a hope in Christ, God can trust you with riches. You've outsmarted the pride cycle, and your prosperity will not lead to pride and destruction. It will lead to increased generosity on your part. I have more to consecrate. God has blessed. This is coveting earnestly the best gifts, whether temporal or spiritual. And having progressed in those areas, I have more to put into the Lord's storehouse to become the common property of the whole church. I can bless more people this way. And that's exactly what's happening here. They first gave themselves to the Lord. And after they had obtained that hope in Christ, God could trust them with temporal blessings because he knew what they would do with them. They would seek them with the intent to do good, which is exactly what the Macedonian saints are doing. Paul goes on, insomuch that we desired Titus, that as he had begun, so he would also finish in you the same grace also. I mean, Titus has been a wonderful junior companion to Paul. Titus had brought news to Paul about how things are going in Corinth, and he's going to go back and assist in gathering up the donations of the saints that are there. And he's started that work. Well, keep going with it. Okay, Titus, continue. Therefore, as ye abound in everything, in faith and utterance and knowledge and in all diligence and in your love to us, see that ye abound in this grace also. Such beautiful commendation on the part of Paul. Yes, he spoke strongly in 1 Corinthians and cried repentance, but just as he was congratulating them for their godly sorrow, now he's congratulating them for their godly abundance, abounding in so many wonderful gifts. Your utterance, your knowledge, that's what the Corinthians were known for from the very beginning, right? A place of incredible rhetoric, of worldly wisdom, of intellectualism, which is both a gift and a curse simultaneously. They abounded in those things. They also abounded in faith and diligence. So there's faith and works coming together in beautiful ways. Well, you've abounded in your love for us as apostles. Well, how about your love for saints you have never seen or met? But to bless them, will you abound in this grace, which suggests it's a gift from God, not just a gift from these saints? Will you abound in this gift as well? I picture a congregation of rich young rulers there in Corinth. And they've been richly blessed by God. They have been abundant in the spiritual gifts that the Lord has blessed them with. You think of the rich young ruler, and I've been keeping these commandments from my youth up. I have abounded in diligence and work and faith and all of these things. Wonderful. Well, one thing thou lackest. Will you abound in this grace as well? Sadly, the rich young ruler was unable to. Well, how about you, Corinthian saints? Will you be more generous than he? Will you be as generous as your Macedonian brothers and sisters? Will you be as generous with others as God has been with you? Please dig deep. In verse 8 and 9, Paul admits, I speak not by commandment. So this is not being forced upon you. Remember back in verse 3, the Macedonian saints were willing of themselves. This can't be me twisting your arm. I'm not coming around as a collection agency. You have to pay up, fork it over for the saints in Jerusalem. No, I'm not speaking by commandment, but by occasion of the forwardness of others. So the whole reason I'm bringing this up is just because the Macedonian saints have been so generous. It gave me an occasion, their forwardness, their generosity, their willing desire to be a blessing to others. Yeah, it's provided me a measuring stick. And if you want to measure up to that, if you want to outdo them, this is Christ-like competition. Okay, we're going to see who can consecrate most generously. And this forwardness of others is giving me an occasion, or giving you an opportunity to bless others as well. It's also giving you a chance, he says, to prove the sincerity of your love, which is such a powerful phrase. I know you love people. I know that love is sincere. But to have an opportunity to give proof of that, to not just say it, but to show it by contributing. There's the great story in church history where someone had gone through something difficult and the news was spreading, and Joseph Smith was surrounded by some other saints that were like, oh, wow, that's really too bad. That's really sad. And everyone was expressing their sorrow on behalf of this poor afflicted fellow saint. And Joseph's looking around and he finally reaches into his wallet and pulls out $5 and says, well, I'm sorry too, but I'm sorry to the tune of $5. How about you? And by his forwardness, it gave an occasion to his fellow saints to go, okay, yeah, it's not enough just to go, wow, it's really too bad. But man, if it were me, I would want people not just to feel sorry for me, but to show that sorrow, that fellowship of suffering with a fellowship of ministry. Is there anything you can do to help? Okay? I mean, if you don't, then I'll take the sorrow. I'll take the compassion. But if you have an opportunity to add add charity to your charity. Remember when Paul wrestled with that in 1 Corinthians 13? He had a different order then. Then it was, if you give all your goods to feed the poor, but don't have charity. In other words, if you give charity that's not motivated by charity, then it doesn't really matter. It doesn't really count. But flip it around, and I wonder if the same is true. Let's say you do have the pure love of Christ. Wonderful. I'm not doubting the sincerity of your love, Paul is saying to the Corinthians. But if you have that type of charity and the opportunity to embody it in giving of your temporal blessings to others who need them, oh, then that's That's both kinds of charity coming together in magnificent ways. If you're giving charity, I sure hope you have charity behind it as your motivation. But if you are motivated by the pure love of Christ, then I hope that charity is made manifest in the charity you give to those around you. Okay? Now, from there, he'll say to these wonderful saints, by way of example, I mean, you've seen the example of the Macedonians. Well, let me raise it infinitely and give you an even greater example to follow. In verse 9, for ye know the grace of our Lord Jesus Christ. How's that for the greatest example that's ever lived? That though he was rich, and we've seen Paul talk about Christ's riches, rich in mercy, rich in goodness, the riches of his grace. But though Christ was rich in all of those things, yet for your sakes he became poor, that ye through his poverty might be rich. Which takes us back to the role reversal that lies at the heart of the atonement and condescension of Christ. Remember last week we connected condescension with compassion. And for Christ, who was rich in glory premortally, to empty himself of that, to be the Word made flesh, to come down and dwell among us, and among the least of those his brothers and sisters. Think about that. The Son of Almighty God lying in a manger, walking the dusty streets of Jerusalem or the hillsides of Galilee, and out of his infinite wealth to become poor. He was the rich young ruler, and nothing he lacked. And he poured out all that he had. He opened the windows of heaven and poured himself out in hopes that we would have room to receive him and receive from him an example worth following for the rest of our lives. Through his poverty, he makes us rich. And will we impoverish ourselves a little so that other people can gain a lot? I'm speaking to those of us in the first world, as they call it. And are there things that we can decide? Can we look over our budget and think, maybe I am spending a little too much on myself? This goes back to the parable of the broken hose that I've shared before. Before I start filling my Olympic-sized swimming pool, should I turn my hose on my neighbor's lawn since their grass is looking pretty dry? Okay? Now, verse 10 through 12, herein I give my advice. And that's all it is. Remember, he's not speaking by way of commandment, but this is incredibly good counsel. Here's my advice. For this is expedient for you who have begun before, not only to do, but also to be forward a year ago. And what he's saying here is, last year when I first brought this up, you were the very first people who wanted to give. In fact, you were the very first people who actually started giving. But are you still passing around the plate and just collecting? We need to get the water to the end of the rope. We need to finish the contribution and complete the collection and bring this generosity to the people of Jerusalem so they can actually live on it, okay? The way he puts it next is so powerful. If you started this, you began before, now therefore perform the doing of it. That as there was a readiness to will, so your heart was in the right place, the Spirit was willing, so there may be a performance also out of that which ye have. For if there be first a willing mind, it is accepted according to that a man hath, and not according to that he hath not. With that last line, it's this sense of, no, it's the thought that counts. But everything leading up to it was, but the thought, don't leave it at the thought. Don't end it there. If there's any way to convert thought into action, to convert desire into deed, then please, by all means, do it. And I love this sense of urgency on Paul's part, where it's, I've been among you. I provided for myself. I was making tents there with Aquila and Priscilla. But to see your temporal wealth, your material means, and the generosity that was made manifest as you began to make a collection for the suffering poor. I'm so grateful. I'm not saying anything negative about that. It was a wonderful start. Can we finish? Can we actually do this now? Okay? Perform the doing of it. So if I were to paraphrase Paul here, I would say, don't just dream, do. Don't just plan, perform. Don't just wish, work. And don't just sympathize, serve. We can have the greatest intentions of all time. But if our intentions do not convert into actions, this is what James will say about faith without works is dead. You can have all the faith in the world and all the hope for someone and all the charity, but until it's converted into actual action, talk is cheap. Let's move forward. Will they? Let's see. Now, verse 13, as if reading their mind, and maybe this is what's their cause of their hesitation, he says, "For I mean not that other men be eased and ye burdened." I mean, can you imagine all the cries of, "That's not fair, it's not fair." I can picture children saying such a thing. Why do I have to give? I earn these things. I'm now being burdened with not only my needs, temporal, but also the temporal needs of other people in some other place. Well, why didn't they just work and earn money themselves? Oh, careful. But Paul is trying to be careful himself. I'm not trying to ease others at your expense. He says, but by an equality. That's what I'm aiming for. Okay? One heart, one mind. No poor among us. And then notice this, that now, at this time, so keep in mind how specific Paul is being regarding time. It's right now. It's at this time. Your abundance may be a supply for their want. But then flip around the pronouns. Right now, at this time, it's your abundance and their want. But wait a while, and that could change. He says that their abundance, now we've switched the pronoun, also may be a supply for your want. Again, that there may be equality. As it is written, and here he's going to quote Exodus 16, "He that had gathered much had nothing over, and he that had gathered little had no lack." How's that for equality? God has met our every need. And notice, it's God who met them. Because guess what Exodus 16 is talking about? The context of the verse of Scripture that Paul just used, it's the giving of the manna to the Israelites in the wilderness. This was not something they earned on their own. They weren't working for it in ways that they could take all the credit. No, this was a miracle every morning. This was God providing for their temporal needs. And He adjusted things. He distributed it according to the needs of each individual. If you need more, then gather more, and your needs will be met. If you need less, then gather less. There will be an equality here. And there won't be some kind of surplus. You're trying to amass the manna. No, it's going to rot before you can use it on yourself. Think about, I just love what Paul is doing. As his mind so quickly went to Old Testament Scripture, and the place it went for this discussion, oh, there's no better place to ponder. But go back to what he'd said at the beginning. You can bless them today. Who knows, but they might be the ones blessing you tomorrow. Remember last year in the Old Testament, we saw this early on in the days of Abraham, for example, that hospitality was an absolutely essential priority in the ancient Middle East. I mean, if you're a nomad, if you're living in the desert and you need someone to help you, if they will not open their hearts and their homes to you, if they will not provide food or water, you will die in the desert. And if you're going to be that reliant upon someone else, then you better be equally generous whenever someone else comes relying on you. I remember when I was a teenager, well, late teen, early young adult, I just got my mission call. I was headed out. And there had been some economic challenges in our family. And my dad was in the stake presidency at the time and just serving as much as he possibly could. And that's church service. As far as work, things were rough. There had been an earthquake in California, and the company my dad worked for was really struggling to pay the bills and pay their employees, including my dad. And we kind of just got by on Mom's teaching salary and my little brother's paper route. I was on my mission at the time and didn't know just how bad things had gotten at home economically. But thankfully, there were other people in our ward who did know, or at least guessed, how hard it might be for my family with 2 missionaries out serving and some tough economics at home. Our ward bishop called my dad in and said, "President Halverson, I just wanted to report a little bit on the Valencia First Ward. I think if the Lord asked us to live the law of consecration, and I know he does in the temple, but the way it was lived back in the day, I think our ward would be ready for it." And my dad was like, "Wow, that's impressive, Bishop. That's good to know." And it felt kind of, is this just a report from the bishop to the member of the stake presidency on the spiritual health of the ward he was presiding over? Well, it was more personal than that. That was just lead-in. As the bishop said to my dad, as a member of our ward and as your bishop, I've just been concerned for you, and I know that others have been as well. And they want to keep their generosity anonymous. But I just needed you to know that there have been some very kind people in our ward that have made some contributions to help your family cover the financial needs of your missionary children, your son in Puerto Rico and your daughter in Venezuela. And I was blown away when my dad told me that. I always tried to serve diligently, but I served with a little more consecration myself, knowing that others had consecrated to help me be out there. There's something beautiful about what Paul is suggesting here. And no wonder the Lord says in the Doctrine and Covenants that all things are spiritual unto me, including the so-called temporal. In some ways, is this what this chapter is all about? Is just, are we passing around the plate and increase your fast offerings? Oh, the Lord sees so much more here than just that. He's reaching into the heart, not the wallet, wanting to see what's there. In fact, speaking of God, Paul says in verse 16, "But thanks be to God." Ultimately, the generosity comes from him because he plants within us the gift of charity. He makes us desire to give what we have, and he gives us the means to be able to give it to others. So thanks be to God, which put the same earnest care into the heart of Titus for you. Here's Paul's gratitude for his junior companion. I love that guy. Titus, what an amazing soul. But God placed within him this earnest care. God touched Titus's heart. No wonder he's been serving so diligently among you. I pray God will put similar care in your hearts for the people we're trying to serve in Jerusalem. Now, speaking of Titus, Paul goes on, "For indeed he accepted the exhortation, but being more forward, of his own accord, he went unto you." So just like the Macedonian saints going above and beyond and doing it willingly, Titus is the same, guilty as charged, right? Doing everything he possibly can and not having to be told. He that is compelled in all things, the same as a slothful and not a wise servant. Well, that doesn't describe Titus at all. He was anything but slothful, anything but unwise. He accepts the exhortation. He moves forward. He does it of his own accord. "And he went unto you, Corinthian saints, and we have sent with him the brother, whose praise is in the gospel throughout all the churches." Now, we don't know who this brother is. Some early church fathers thought it might be Luke, as one of the traveling companions of Paul. Luke, who wrote the Gospel of Luke, Luke, who wrote the book of Acts. It's a possibility, but we don't have any evidence for it or against it. So let's just leave it the way Paul said it. It's just some brother, some unnamed brother, but what a brother he was. A true brother who wanted to be his brother's keeper. Remember what Paul said, his praise is in the gospel throughout all the churches. So maybe that's why he doesn't even need to name him, because everywhere he's been, people just love this guy. They praise him. Every church has been blessed wherever he's gone. And not that only, Paul continues, but who was also chosen of the churches to travel with us with this grace, which is administered by us to the glory of the same Lord and declaration of your ready mind. So that's why this good brother is going there with Titus. Okay? He was chosen of the churches to do so. And he's coming to give you a chance to declare your ready mind. So start declaring. Give proof of the love that is in you. Verse 20, avoiding this, that no man should blame us in this abundance which is administered by us. Which is an interesting thing to think about. How would they be blamed? Well, on the one hand, let's stick with the temporal. No wonder you need multiple people. You're going to have Titus. You're going to have this other brother. I don't want to put all the funds in one person's hands. In case something happens, I don't want anyone to blame us that their generosity didn't actually bless the people of Jerusalem as intended. We do this in all transactions in the church. Anytime that tithing money is being counted, is being deposited in the bank, there's always more than one person. And so to make sure that we're covering ourselves so there is no blame. But take it up a notch and include yourself. It's one thing not to blame the bishopric or the ward financial clerk. But what about blaming ourselves? Would someone else blame me for the use or misuse of the abundance God has given me? Would there be those that second guess the way I spend my money because I'm not helping others? That I am, again, turning the hose only on my own lawn and not on the lawns all around me. Okay? So be careful about that blame. Paul didn't want any of his fellow workers to be blamed. So the advice he gives, providing for honest things, not only in the sight of the Lord, but also in the sight of men. It's like what Joseph Smith said on the way to Carthage. I have a conscience void of offense toward God and all men. Paul feels the same. So if God's watching, if men are watching, be honest. Provide for honest things, and that you'll never be blamed. And we have sent with them our brother, Paul continues, whom we have oftentimes proved diligent in many things, but now much more diligent, upon the great confidence which I have in you. They actually did the same thing in the early church. And there are some interesting revelations in the Doctrine and Covenants that deal with this temporal aspect. That if one person is going to be carrying money to go print the Revelations, for example, make sure they don't travel alone. Let's provide for honest things. Let's allow people to prove their own diligence and their superabundant diligence. Now much more diligent, Paul says. I want you to have confidence in each other that what you are giving to the Lord is going to bless people all around you. Now, verse 23 and 24, he then ends this part of the letter. Whether any do inquire of Titus, he is my partner and fellow helper concerning you. Or our brethren be inquired of? They are the messengers of the churches and the glory of Christ. How's that for vouching for your companions? Partners, fellow helpers, the glory of Christ. These people can be trusted with your generosity. Wherefore, show ye to them and before the churches the proof of your love and of our boasting on your behalf. Oh, please make us proud. Prove us right. We have been bragging about you. I mean, when the Macedonian saints were coming through out of their generosity, I kept thinking to myself, oh yeah, but just wait for the Corinthians. I mean, they started first, and they've been generous, and it hasn't been sent yet. But I can only imagine how generous they've become to this point. And here Paul is like, please don't prove me wrong. Okay? Prove yourself, prove your love, and give evidence of the kind of reputation I've been bragging to people about. Please do. Now, chapter 9, Paul will continue. Some scholars have even wondered, is this another letter because it seems repetitive based on what he just said in chapter 8? Perhaps. Or is it just, again, such an important thing that Paul is going to continue hammering it home? Well, he does begin in verse 1, chapter 9, verse 1. For as touching the ministering to the saints, so we're still on that subject, it is superfluous for me to write to you. So superfluous means it's unnecessary. It's over the top, because I know you already know these things. Again, maybe he doesn't need to give a chapter 9 based on what he's already said in chapter 8. Well, I'm glad he does, because of some of the things that he says here. He explains himself, for I know the forwardness of your mind, for which I boast of you to them of Macedonia, that Achaia was ready a year ago. So like I said in the previous chapter, I was bragging about you to the Macedonians. Maybe that was why they were so generous. They were trying to keep up with you. Well, now it's your turn to keep up with them. That over a year before, the saints down south in Achaia, where Corinth was, have been generous and preparing a contribution to the suffering saints. So I probably don't need to repeat myself and say it all over again, but here we are. He says, your zeal hath provoked very many. And that's that righteous, Christ-like competition. Okay? Who can be more generous of these two? Yet have I sent the brethren, lest our boasting of you should be in vain in this behalf. That, as I said, ye may be ready, lest haply if they of Macedonia come with me and find you unprepared, we, that we not say ye, should be ashamed in this same confident boasting. Now, let's unpack what he just said there, because it's tricky the way it's translated. He is giving the Corinthians the benefit of the doubt. In fact, there was no doubt on his mind. You started strong. In fact, you were setting such a powerful example that it got the Macedonians going. But again, if that was just a start on your part and you haven't finished, the spirit was willing, but the flesh isn't done, okay? So if you haven't yet performed the doing of it, though the desire has long been there, then please get yourself ready to follow through and to actually go on this. Because if somebody from Macedonia came down and kind of got news on the street here in Corinth and said, wait, you guys didn't give anything to the Jerusalemites? Everything, you guys were all talk and no action? All desire and no deed? That's embarrassing. What a shame. And that's what Paul is warning them about. We would be ashamed. I'm not saying you would need to be ashamed, because I know you've been working on this. He's, again, giving them the benefit of the doubt. But I would hate for me to be ashamed, like, oh, Paul, you've been talking them up. But they don't deserve that kind of commendation. So what Paul is helping them see is, let's follow through. I'll put it this way. Just be ready if a Macedonian shows up. I've been telling them about you, and I hope you live up to your reputation. What I actually love about this, and we'll see some more of this in this chapter, Paul is trying to set up the Corinthians for success. Have you ever told somebody about someone? Let's put it this way. Oh, I've got a friend. You're traveling through such and such a town. Oh, I've got a friend there, or a family member there, and they are the most hospitable, generous, kind-hearted people ever. If you ever need a place to stay when you're passing through such and such a town, oh, just call me and I'll give you the address and just head on over. Now, that's wonderful praise, and I'm sure that your friend or family member there in that city totally deserves it. But can you imagine them getting a knock on the door in the middle of the night, and total strangers are showing up, and they're like, hi, we're so-and-so, we're friends of your friend or family member, and we need a place to stay, and they said, your door is always open. Now imagine their spirit is willing, their heart's in the right place, but they had no clue that you were going to knock on their door that night. And yeah, we'll make it work somehow. Can you give us a second? And there's some cleanup to do, and we got to change the bed sheets and kick a child out of their room to make room for the visitors. And we're totally willing to do it. Their heart is as good as gold. But man, I really would have loved a little advance notice, so I could have calmly prepared for all of this. Because right now, yeah, my heart's in the right place, but there's a part of it that's a little frustrated with my sibling or my friend that set this all up without telling us. Does that make sense? I think if we can just give people a heads up, they're on their way, or, hey, I told so-and-so, would this work for you? Or I'm going to be in such and such I'm going to be in your area in a couple of weeks. Is there any way that, just give them some advance notice, for crying out loud. And that's what Paul is giving them here, some advanced notice. He gives them a chance to live up to expectations, okay? Live up to the reputation that they do deserve. Well, verse 5, Paul goes on, therefore I thought it necessary to exhort the brethren, that they would go before unto you, and make up beforehand your bounty. So again, this is before the Macedonians are going to come down. I'm giving you time to prepare so you can be as generous as everyone knows you to be. You can make up beforehand your bounty. And by the way, the Greek word for bounty there is eulogia. That's where we get the word eulogy. Think about that. A blessing, a gift, something you say about a person who has passed on. The eulogy you give. Well, I hope that's prepared for beforehand. I hope that you have been given the opportunity to really reflect on the life of the recently departed, so you can give that eulogy. The eu, by the way, is the Greek prefix for good, and logi comes from logos, that word made flesh. And so a eulogy is such a beautiful Greek word. And this bounty, this eulogy that you're giving, I'm trying to tell you in advance so you can get ready to give it, to prepare this eulogy, prepare beforehand your bounty, whereof ye had notice before. So again, all this advanced planning, give them time to prepare themselves, that the same might be ready as a matter of bounty, eulogy again, and not as of covetousness. And what he's getting at there is, if I give you some advanced time, then you can prepare yourself and be in the right spirit when the opportunity to give actually arrives. There's not grumbling like, of course we're going to open our homes to you. That I love to do that, but that punk brother of mine didn't tell me that you were on your way. I wish you could have called in advance, because now I'm doing it just like I would otherwise, but I'm doing it a little grudgingly, not as charitably on the inside as I would like. I'm kind of grumbling under my breath at this. And that's what he gets at with this word, that word covetousness at the end. If I only knew in advance, if I knew what was being asked of me and I could put my affairs in order and get things ready. Honestly, this is important when we're asking someone else for help. Instead of just assuming that they can drop everything in that moment and then why aren't you coming through for me? It's, here's some things I'm going through and I could really use your assistance, but time is not of the essence right now. I'm trying to give you the heads up so you can prepare yourself. But I could really use some assistance. It's nice when you get an email from the Elders Quorum president and they say so-and-so is moving in a couple of weeks, and so put it on your calendar and this is what we're going to need. And we can rally the troops and get all hands on deck, as opposed to a last-second cry for help. I'm moving today. Can you come and help? And I've already got so much on my schedule and I can't just drop it all and squeeze it in. Or think about this in terms of priesthood leaders or Relief Society leaders that are giving callings and making assignments. We can do such a better job of setting people up for success if we'll start a little earlier in the planning process, if we'll let them know beforehand, if we'll try to understand where they're coming from and what they're up against and where they are in life and the situation you get this? I've talked before, I think during our Doctrine and Covenants year of study, about exploratory interviews that we always did in our bishoprics, where rather than sit down and say, oh, here's the calling and will you accept it? And they're blindsided and like, what? I know I'm not supposed to say no, but I have no idea how I'm going to be able to pull this off. As opposed to an exploratory interview, which takes longer, but it's such a blessing to the people that you're asking to serve, to be able to say, you know what, we've been thinking about you and we've been thinking about this calling, and I'm not here to extend it officially, so don't feel any pressure to say yes. I'm not asking, so you can't say yes. I'm exploring. I'm doing my homework. I'm studying it out beforehand. And I just want to lay out my cards on the table and let you know that we really feel, and we've been praying about it, that your skill set or your attributes would be so perfect in this calling. We just don't know everything else that's on your plate. And so we're seeking information to round out our inspiration. And maybe at the end of this interview, you'll feel good about it, and so will I, and we'll make it official. Or maybe with the information you give me, I'll realize, we didn't know about that. And so when we asked the Lord if you were good for this calling, the Lord had to say, because you really would be. But we didn't ask him about timing. We didn't ask him about if you'd be able to do that at this time. We just asked him if you'd be good. And you would be good, but not now. So thank you. You're not saying no to a calling, because I am not offering it. I'm not extending it to you. Or the other possibility, thank you for that information. I need to go back and do a little more homework with the bishopric. And let's set up another interview, and I'll let you know what we feel. We may still move forward with it, even though you've got so much on your plate. But this way you've been heard and seen, and we're not extending this calling blindly or ignorantly. Okay? We can do a lot better than we've done along those lines. And I love that Paul is doing that for these Corinthian saints. I want you to be a cheerful giver. And I think people would be if we were a little more wise in the ways that we invite them and prepare them. Okay? There's a big, even the church does that with mission presidents and mission leaders. It's a ways out, so you can get your affairs in order. It's not just, hey, can you drop things and run? Okay? And then he says something that I absolutely love in verse 6 and 7. Paul says, but this I say. So here's this overarching principle that is motivating the practical advice that I'm giving you as far as this collection plate. This I say, he which soweth sparingly shall reap also sparingly, and he which soweth bountifully shall reap also bountifully. And that bountifully, again, comes from the Greek word eulogia. Here's the real eulogy you can give. Here's the real blessing, the gift, the good word that you can give to other people. Do it as bountifully as you possibly can. And then he says, every man according as he purposeth in his heart, so let him give, not grudgingly or of necessity, for God loveth a cheerful giver. We'll talk about a beautiful overarching principle. In some ways, all the specifics that we've been dealing with so far falls under that 2-verse heading. A cheerful giver. God loves a giver, yes. But if you're giving without the right motivation behind it, you might as well have held back the gift. Don't, though. Please give it anyway, okay? But give in such a way, hopefully, that your heart catches up and your motives begin to be purified with time. But it's not just what you're giving, it's how you're giving it. Remember Jesus in the Mark account of the widow with her mite? That as he sat across from the temple treasury, he wasn't just seeing how much people gave. The Mark account says he was watching to see how they gave. The how much was almost beside the point. And that poor widow, if she had done it grudgingly, then I don't think the Lord would have singled her out for commendation. It's not just that she gave all that she had. It's that she gave her heart right along with it. Her heart was in the right place, cheerfully giving. Section 64 of the Doctrine and Covenants is another great place to study this, because the Lord seeks the mind and a willing heart. How are you going to serve? With what kind of attitude? Is it just of necessity? Oh, I have to. Another day on the chain gang. Is it grudgingly? Or is it cheerfully and bountifully? On my office wall, I will often put up almost mantras, but they're usually scriptural phrases. Just something to jolt me back into focus and attention if I'm starting to lose focus there in the office. And one of those little scriptural signs, simply 2 words, but this is the verse that it comes from, says, sow bountifully. It comes from that phrase. He which soweth bountifully shall reap also bountifully. And so for me, when it comes to planting seeds, when it comes to reaching out to students that haven't been coming to Institute, for example, or just trying to make a difference in people's lives, it's an amazing motto to follow. Sow bountifully. And the unspoken promise there is that God will reward you bountifully for those efforts. Scatter seed as widely as you can. You'll be amazed at the harvest. Now, verse 8 through 10, Paul then says, and God is able to make all grace abound toward you, that ye, always having all sufficiency in all things, may abound to every good work. Can you sense the abundance into that in that verse? The generosity of God, he makes his grace abound. It is superabundant. To the point that, and then notice all these words, ye always, having all sufficiency in all things. I mean, talk about nothing lacking. You've got everything you've ever needed and you always have. And because of that, you yourself can abound in every good work. God pours it into you and overflows. So of course you can pour it out to other people. As it is written, and so here's Paul mining the depths of the Old Testament to find another great verse to illustrate it. Before it was to Exodus, now it's to the Psalms. Psalm 112, verse 9, he hath dispersed abroad, he hath given to the poor, his righteousness remaineth forever. You see that? It never runs out. And yet here you are dispersing, here you are giving. Oh, but since you are giving, you've unkinked the hose, of course the Lord is going to keep sending living water through it. Okay? Your righteousness remaineth forever. Now he that ministereth seed to the sower, both minister bread for your food, and multiply your seed sown, and increase the fruits of your righteousness. What I love about these verses is that they suggest an abundance mentality rather than a scarcity mindset. I think too often, if we're under this misunderstanding of scarcity, then we're trying to hoard the resources to ourselves because it's going to run out and there won't be enough to meet my needs, let alone anyone else's. Whereas if it's an abundance mindset, well, of course I can share. It just keeps on coming. I don't need all of this. My needs are more than met. So please let me meet yours. In fact, I can come at a level of self-sacrifice because I know the Lord more than makes it up to me. And so, of course, his grace will abound. Why can't I abound in my generosity to others? The way that Paul put it in that latter verse about ministering seed to the sower, he's going to keep giving you more seed to plant. And guess what seeds do? They grow. They grow into grain with more kernels within it. They grow into trees that provide fruit with yet more seeds within. Talk about abundance. This is the growth mindset. This is the Lord giving and giving and giving gifts that keep on giving. That's what an endowment means. And everything the Lord endows us with is meant to provide not just our daily bread, day by day by day, but even the seed to produce yet additional harvests. Okay, does that make sense? It's beautiful the way Paul is putting all of this. So sow your seed. Increase your fruit. The Lord wants you to have more than enough so that you can give. So verse 11, being enriched in everything to all bountifulness, which causeth through us thanksgiving to God. Again, he gets the credit every time. It's his bounty that is allowing you to be bountiful to others. It's the riches of his grace that are allowing you to give of your riches. For the administration of this service not only supplieth the want of the saints, but is abundant also by many thanksgivings unto God. You see, your service to others helps them live both of the two great commandments too. Gratitude to God from whom all blessings flow, but also gratitude to your fellow men and women who are turning that flow in your direction. Now, there's many thanksgivings unto God. And then he finishes the subject in verse 13 through 15. Whilst by the experiment of this ministration, and another translation for experiment could be proof. So by the proof of this ministration. Remember, you're trying to prove the sincerity of your love. And as you join in the fellowship of the ministry, the proof's in that pudding. Okay? Here's the experiment, and you passed. You now have evidence of your generosity, of your goodness, of your love. The experiment of this ministration, they glorify God for your professed subjection unto the gospel of Christ. I mean, your professed subjection, your so-called subjection, is Paul casting doubt? No. But if anyone else were, if they wondered, are the Corinthian saints really as generous as Paul says? Have they really submitted themselves to the gospel of Jesus Christ? Has it changed them in the way that the Christians say the gospel does? Have they been transformed? Well, let's run an experiment. Let's make them aware of people in need and see what they do. How's that for an experiment? Well, pass the test, my friends. Prove us right so that people will not just think highly of you, but more importantly, glorify God, who is changing your heart and making you this generous. You understand? I love how Paul is putting it here. Okay, your professed subjection to the gospel. Now show it's real. It's heartfelt. It's down deep. And for your liberal distribution unto them and unto all men. There's another chance for you to prove this, just how liberal you will be. And by their prayer for you, which long after you for the exceeding grace of God in you. Oh, they're praying. They're longing. They hope that God is being gracious to you so that you can be gracious to them. And God is. That is the Father of mercies, the God of all comfort, the generous God of grace. So no wonder Paul says in concluding this thought, thanks be unto God for his unspeakable gift. An unspeakable one. It's one that can't be described. It can't be quantified. Good luck to the accountants out there. How do you weigh and measure a consecrated heart? When somebody, they're not just professing their Christianity. They're proving it every chance they get. And what a gift they are to the world from a God of such generosity. Oh, unspeakable gifts. And who deserves the ultimate credit and gratitude? Well, God himself. It's one thing to have people be so impressed with you. Forget that. It's another thing for people to be impressed with God's amazing grace. Well, Paul is going to continue his glorying in the next chapter. And in chapter 10, there's some counsel here, there's some wonderful advice, but there's also just ongoing praise of God from the Apostle Paul. He says in verse 1, now I, Paul, myself, beseech you by the meekness and gentleness of Christ, who in presence am base among you, but being absent am bold toward you. Now, interesting description of Paul here, and he's admitted it himself. When I'm not around, I'm bold. I can write things in letters that I don't know if I'd ever say to your face. And that, is one of the nice things about writing things down. It creates some safe distance between the writer and the reader so that people can, that hurt. Oh, but darn it, he's right. Okay, it works within me. It brings some godly sorrow. Again, this is building on that same conversation we had last week in chapter 7, that Paul was strong in writing to the point he was almost sorry for it until he realized, oh no, it's helping you with your godly sorrow, then good. I'm glad I was bold. But I was only bold in absence. In presence, I'm more base. Now, this might be his own choosing. I can afford to be more bold in absence because I am so humble in presence. And you know how much I love you. You know how meek I try to be as I serve you in person. And if speaking of proof of your love, well, if you've had enough proof of my love while I've been with you, then when I'm away from you and I'm writing these letters, then I hope you know the spirit that I'm sending these letters in. That I'm not trying to make you feel bad to make me feel better. No. These epistles are wetted with my own tears. We saw that last week. And so that's Paul's side. Then again, it might be the people's side. If they're having a hard time embracing Paul, if they're more of the factions that are for Cephas or for Apollos, if they're having a hard time with this one, is Paul channeling their thoughts? You think I am overly bold in my letters, and it hurts too much. And you think that I'm base when I'm here. And you won't open your hearts to my message, and you won't accept my apostolic authority. He says, but I beseech you that I may not be bold when I am present with that confidence wherewith I think to be bold against some, which think of us as if we've walked according to the flesh. For though we walk in the flesh, we do not war after the flesh. Now, Paul's flexing some muscles here. He is showing some apostolic authority. And hold on to this, because it's going to run through most of the rest of what we see today, just off and on. But he has to defend himself against doubters, against people that prefer other approaches to the gospel, or against, this is a true prophet trying to establish his authority in the face of false prophets that are striving to undermine it. Remember, there's divisions in Corinth, and there's some intellectualism, and Paul is determining to know nothing, and so are people not taking him seriously? Is he too base in their eyes? And oh yeah, you sound so, you talk the talk in these letters, but not then you come, and you're a nobody. To me, it's interesting to see some apostles that are more easily read than listened to. Not just apostles, just people in general, that they might have the gift of words in writing, and they can think things through, and they spell it out, and literarily, it's a masterpiece. But in person, they stutter, or they trip up over their words, or physically there's just no charisma there. You're like, what? Jonathan Edwards was that way. One of the most famous theologians in American history. You read his sermons and you're blown away. You read Sinners in the Hands of an Angry God, and it's like, no wonder people fainted in the aisles of church, to the point that he couldn't even get through his sermon. He must have been such a charismatic clergyman and a powerful preacher. But he wasn't. He was kind of socially awkward. He'd get nervous with people. And he had so many incredible things to say that he could say powerfully in writing. But in person, he would often stare at the rope at the back of the chapel that people would pull to ring the church bells on Sunday morning. And he'd just stare at that because there was no eye contact. He didn't have to look at the parishioners that were down below eye level. And in kind of a monotone approach, he'd just read his sermon, and yet people reacted to the words in such powerful ways. There are, I hope this makes sense in terms of how people might be approaching Paul the Apostle. And since we only have his words, no wonder we see him as such a strong servant of the Lord, so bold and unyielding. But in person, again, Joseph Smith said he was short. Was he a Zacchaeus of sorts? Is this short little tent maker? Did people take him seriously in person? Well, some people evidently did not. And Paul is flexing some muscles and saying, you want me to be that bold when I come? If you force me to, then I may have to. I just don't like warring after the flesh. I would rather trust in the Spirit of God. I would rather trust in the foolishness of preaching and leave your consciences pricked in hopes that you'll then turn to the Lord and make some necessary changes. I determined to know nothing. Well, maybe I determined to be nothing. But if you need me to be a little more strong in your presence, oh, I can be. I just would prefer not to have to go there. In verse 4 through 6, speaking of the world's weapons and warring after the flesh, Paul explains himself. For the weapons of our warfare are not carnal. So I'm not going in that direction. I'm not appealing to worldly wisdom or charismatic strength. No, that's just carnal weaponry. Instead, what weapons does he use? He uses the ones that are mighty through God to the pulling down of strongholds, casting down imaginations, and every high thing that exalteth itself against the knowledge of God. Now that's spiritual power. If it can cast down imaginations, which can be translated as human reasoning. Again, this is Corinth, Athens' sister city. And if the Spirit of God, more than the wisdom of the world, can pull that down, can humble the high things, this intellectual pride that pushes back against the knowledge of God. No, I'm going to give you the knowledge of God, but I'll do it in a godly way, in a humble and meek approach. In fact, what will divine knowledge do that worldly wisdom can't? I love this next phrase. Bringing into captivity every thought to the obedience of Christ, and having in a readiness to revenge all disobedience when your obedience is fulfilled. There's the revenge of godly sorrow, ready to revenge that disobedience. Beautiful. But you see that God's ways are not the world's ways, that God's weapons are not the world's weapons, that the spiritual charisma is a different thing than the worldly type. And so this diminutive little disciple, this Paul, I believe, I need to look up the quote again, but again, where Joseph says that he was short, I believe he also said that his voice was, nothing to write home about, until he really got into it. And then his preaching started to sound like the roar of a lion. It makes you wonder, how did Joseph know all this about what Paul looked like and sounded like? Oh, well, he's a visionary man. But to see Paul in that light, to picture him trusting in the foolishness of preaching and the power of God, so that he wasn't flexing the arm of flesh, but was relying upon the arm of God and paying people the compliment. I know that between you and God, if you just read these words and sit with them, God will change your heart. God will convince you of the truthfulness of all of this. And between you and him, you'll start to feel godly sorrow and begin to experience a mighty change of heart. In some ways, this is Paul's equivalent of what Jesus did with a woman taken in adultery. Just calmly squatting down and writing in the dirt to allow other people the chance to work through things and let the Spirit work on them. That's Paul's preferred approach, because there's nothing like the Spirit to bring down pride, nothing like the Spirit to cast down vain imaginations, or my favorite one, nothing like the Spirit to bring into captivity every thought to the obedience of Christ. Man, can you imagine having so much control of your thoughts? I mean, the mind wanders. And it's this, the meandering mind, and just almost like water, just flowing downhill in any direction, just trying to find the path of least resistance. I mean, no wonder mindfulness and meditation takes so much practice to begin to bring the mind into subjection, into captivity, as Paul puts it. Every thought. So often our thoughts seem like a picture of someone walking a dog, and then another dog, and another dog, and picture some little kid just trying to earn some money, but they create this dog walking service and then pretty much you have a whole pack, and your hands are filled with leashes, and the dogs are going everywhere. Or like herding cats. I mean, pick your analogy. And that's the mind. And it's bouncing left and right, and it can't focus on anything. I mean, we're living in an age of ADD, and we all seem to have it to some degree. And yet, with the Spirit's help, the power of God allowing us to rein in that puppy and hold stronger to the leash. And nope, that thought, get back in here. Get back in line. We're not thinking about that. We're not getting distracted with that. Oh, squirrel. Nope, there's no squirrels. Actually, squirrels are everywhere, but we don't care about a single one. Can you imagine being able to control your thoughts to that degree? That they are captive to Christ. Thoughts that are self-destructive. Thoughts that are unclean. Thoughts that are merely distracting. Thoughts that are self-defeating. Don't let your mind go there. Do you remember the phrase that Jacob uses to the victims of other people's immoralities? 2 times in 2 verses he uses the phrase firmness of mind. You've been victimized, you've been hurt, and I bet your mind is shattered in some ways. And it's going a million places at once. No, you've got to rest in the love of God. You've got to lay hold of it with both hands. And in order to do that, it's your mind that must be firm. It's your thoughts you're going to need to learn to control. Thoughts that lead to temptation. Thoughts that lead to anxiety. Thoughts that lead to depression or anything else. It's our mind that we've lost control of. In the world that is constantly trying to call our attention to other lesser things. And so Paul, preaching powerfully, allowing the Spirit to rein things in, to help us gain that firmness of mind, that eye single to the glory of God. That's focus, that's concentration. Those are thoughts being held captive in obedience to Christ. We've got a ways to go, don't we? But what a goal to aim for. Paul then goes on and says in verse 7 through 9, do ye look on things after the outward appearance? I mean, if you do, that's got to stop. If any man trust to himself that he is Christ's, careful. Let him of himself think this again, that as he is Christ's, even so are we Christ's. So we belong to the Savior just as much as you do. Again, if you doubters out there, you who would prefer someone else to come and tell you you're doing nothing wrong, some false prophet to smooth out your troubled conscience, someone to deaden your pain instead of heal you. No, we are of Christ. We know that. He says, for though I should boast somewhat more of our authority, which the Lord hath given us for edification, and not for your destruction, I should not be ashamed, that I may not seem as if I would terrify you by letters. You see, Paul's not trying to shock and awe them into obedience or submission by pulling rank, by kind of forcing his apostolic authority in their face. He's got it. He says, maybe I should boast more about my authority. I don't want to. I wish you would just trust the spirit of the words that I give. Trust the ultimate authority of Christ that lies behind them all. If you understood I'm just trying to edify and not destroy, then I wouldn't have to terrify you by letters. Then I certainly wouldn't have to terrify you in person, since you don't think I can anyway. No, Paul would prefer to be humble and let the Lord provide the backup that Paul seems to need here. By the way, one of the phrases there that struck me, I swear I've read this before, but this one I was like, has it always been in there? Is the phrase, as he is Christ's, even so are we Christ's. Yeah, they belong to him, so do we. I think we as Latter-day Saints can do a little bit more well, we can do a lot better at honoring the Christianity of those outside our particular faith. That they are of Christ, just like we are. And I would hope, if we could do better at that towards others, I would hope that other Christians could do that better towards us. I would hope that they could say with Paul, you know what, we're going to allow you to belong to Christ just like we do. Fellow Christians, though of a different kind. But getting back to what Paul is up against among these doubters, look at verse 10 and 11. For his letters, say they, are weighty and powerful, but his bodily presence is weak, and his speech contemptible. And the Greek word there means worthless or easy to be ignored. Think about that. I mean, yeah, you write so powerfully, but then you come, and this little man with his squeaky, high-pitched voice that's so easy to ignore and just dismiss. And why do we have to listen to this guy? Now, careful. Paul says, let such an one think this, that such as we are in word by letters when we are absent, such will we be also in deed when we are present. Oh, I can give you a lion's roar if you need one. If I'm weighty in writing, then I can be equally heavy in my speech. I just don't want to be. When I'm with you, I want you to feel my love and God's love. I don't want to make this confrontational, but I can if need be. In some ways, you will get the teacher that you are asking for. I just don't know if you really want that kind. I don't want to be that kind. He then says in verse 12 and 13, for we dare not make ourselves of the number or compare ourselves with some that commend themselves. We don't want to be the ones that have to go around always announcing how amazing we are and all eyes on us. No, there's plenty of people who do that. We're going to meet some later on in this week's material. They're affectionately known as super apostles. and to picture those who, and apostles with a lowercase a, we could call them super missionaries, or the people who at least claim to be. They're the type who commend themselves. But then notice what Paul says to pop their bubble. But they, measuring themselves by themselves and comparing themselves among themselves, are not wise. These are the proud who try to make themselves look good by comparing themselves just to themselves and to each other. And, oh yeah, you're all big fish in a little pond. You're all just kind of puff out your chest. It's like those lizards that stick those side things out, or these animals that puff themselves up to make themselves look bigger than they are, right? And people are doing that here in Corinth. The way Paul puts it, but we will not boast of things without our measure, but according to the measure of the rule which God hath distributed to us, a measure to reach even unto you. Now, when Paul says without our measure there, another way to define that measure is his stewardship. Is there a limit to his responsibility or his authority? He was clear in 1 Corinthians, I'm not trying to build on any other person's foundation. Okay, I'm looking for virgin territory. I'm trying to grow the church. And I'm not trying to come and take credit for somebody else's work. No. In fact, I don't want credit at all. I may have planted, Apollos may have watered, but God gave the increase. Remember we saw that in 1 Corinthians? So, no, I'm not trying to boast of things outside my stewardship. I'm not trying to take credit. I'm not letting things go to my head. I don't claim to be a super apostle. No, but I am an apostle of the Lord Jesus Christ. And so I will do his work in his way. And I hope you'll receive it in the spirit that is given. He says in verse 14, for we stretch not ourselves beyond our measure, as though we reach not unto you. Again, I'm not working outside my jurisdiction. I'm not striving beyond my stewardship. No. For we are come as far as to you also in preaching the gospel of Christ. So I'm not overreaching my authority. I'm not going outside my bounds. I'm not boasting of things without our measure, he says. That is, of other men's labors. But having hope when your faith is increased, that we shall be enlarged by you according to our rule abundantly. That's all he's hoping for. Hoping that the work will continue to expand beyond the immediate area. Okay, I want your faith to increase. I want it to be enlarged as it goes beyond. To preach the gospel in the regions beyond you. That's all I want. And not to boast in another man's line of things made ready to our hand. Paul was never trying to take credit for anyone else's work. He wasn't trying to build on other missionaries' foundations. He just wanted the work to go forward. And all to the glory of God. That's how he ends this chapter. Verse 17 and 18. But he that glorieth, which is what you probably think I'm doing, I'm not glorying in me. Let him glory in the Lord. For not he that commendeth himself is approved, but whom the Lord commendeth. Sound a little like Ammon after his mission? When his brother Aaron is like, whoa, easy, Tiger. It sounds like you're boasting there. And Ammon's like, oh, you've completely misjudged me. I'm boasting all right, but I'm boasting in God. In his strength, I can do all things. To glory in a God of glory that somehow in his generosity lets us tag along as junior companions. It's amazing that he would let us serve alongside him. And Paul is rejoicing in that. He is glorying in the Lord. And as a result, he's content to let the Lord glory in him. I don't want to boast about myself or flex my apostolic muscles. No, I'll let God give me the backup. I'll let the Spirit confirm my every word. And I'm amazed to see modern apostles with the same courage and the same conviction. Not pulling rank, not forcing us, not trying to get us to cower under their authority. No, they simply trust the foolishness of preaching. They simply open their mouths and let them be filled and trust that if we'll simply open our hearts, they will be filled as well. And that through the Holy Ghost, our pride will be pulled down. Our thoughts will be taken captive to Christ. And we will have testimonies that God is true and that God in his goodness sends true messengers to point us to him.